or if you're our friend Luke over in Korea, Saturday morning program for you, or anywhere on the other side of the date line. And the second hour, we got Michael Lofton here with us, and we're going to talk about challenges to the Second Vatican Council, because lots of people have really taken to challenging the Second Vatican Council. It seemed like the council was generally kind of settling into being accepted, but in the last decade or so, more and more challenges to the council. So if that's of interest to you, you're going to love that hour, and Michael's always very, very good. This hour, we're going to take a little trip back in time to 1995 to look at one of the great encyclicals of Pope St. John Paul II, Evangelium Vitae. We're often asked why Catholics get so tied up in the culture war issues, especially abortion, euthanasia, those kinds of things. And this encyclical provides some very helpful answers to that. If you have questions about the gospel of life, or if you even want to challenge what Pope John Paul had to say about and what his vision was for the culture of life, we'd love to talk with you. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. This hour, Evangelium Vitae on Catholic Answers Live. And to help us discuss that very important document, we welcome our first hour guest, Simone Rizkallah. Simone is the Director of Program Growth for Endow Groups. It's an apostolate that calls women together to study the important documents of the Catholic Church. So this is what she does. And I'm very pleased to announce that Simone is also the newest affiliate apologist here at Catholic Answers. Affiliate apologists are top-notch defenders of the Catholic faith who we get to work with on a part-time basis. They help Catholic Answers to grow and improve as an apologetics ministry. Hi, Simone. I'm so glad to get to call you an affiliate apologist.
Thank you, Cy. It's my privilege, pleasure, and honor. It's good to talk to you again.
So tell us a little bit more about Endow Groups before we get into this, because this is important stuff. You'll have to tell me the acronym, because I'm not going to give it a try, but Endow is an acronym for?
For Educating on the Nature and Dignity of Women.
And what do you all do?
Well, we believe that these church documents, just like the one that we're going to talk about today, the Gospel of Life, Evangelium Vitae, they were written because they were meant to be read. And Endow calls women together to read important documents of the Catholic Church. So we organize women into small group communities, and each document takes about 8 to 12 weeks to work through in these study sessions. And it's a wonderful time of faith, education, and friendship.
That is so cool. So you're building up community and making friends, but also developing a deeper understanding of what the church has to say in her documents. What are some of the popular, the more popular documents that you've shared during the Endow meetings?
Well, our most popular document is another 1995 document. Evangelium Vitae was written in 1995. In that same year, John Paul II wrote a pastoral letter to women, and it's a letter that he wrote to all women of the world, not just Catholic women, not just Christian women, but all women, and that is still our most popular document.
That's just so like him. I got a big major document coming out this year, so what I'll do is I'll write another major document this year. He was tireless.
Yes. Well, and this is Endow's 20th anniversary year, so we are revisiting his other touchstone document on the philosophy and theology of what it means to be a woman, which is Mulieris Dignitatum, on the dignity and vocation of women, which is where we get our name, Endow. And so I invite any woman listening to join us for our monthly webinar series with Endow to study this document.
Oh, wonderful. And give us the Endow web address where people can find out more.
Yeah, so if you go to Endow Groups, that's ENDOW, endowgroups.org, and you click on our events page, you can register for our monthly series. We're going to be looking at that document together.
Wonderful. Simone Rizkallah is our guest, and we're talking this time about Evangelium Vitae, which I have to pause before I say it every time because my brain wants to say Humanae Vitae, which is the older document and they are related in the sense that they both constitute kind of responses to trends in the world trends that do not portend good things for humanity, for our entire species. But we often, and I want to start here with you, Simone. We often will hear people say, "Why? Well, like you're a religious show. Why are you getting into all these cultural issues? Why are you doing all this abortion stuff? Why do we do it? And why did John Paul do this in Evangelium Vitae?"
Right. Well, I think you make a really important point I want to draw out a little bit, Cy, is that documents are often written as reactions and responses to what's happening in culture, right? So, for example, a document written by Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, in 1891 was in response to the Industrial Revolution and the rights of laborers and workers and the dignity of workers, right? That was something, Rerum Novarum on new things. This is something new that's happening in culture and society, and the Pope was responding to it. So actually all of the documents that we could read, and who can read all of them, but all of them are responses to what's happening in real life, because Christianity is a response. God cares about what's happening in our real lives. It's all very practical. So on the one hand, you can look at these documents and say, I don't have time to look at this and study philosophy and theology. That's too privileged, or that's too much of an intellectual luxury. But these documents are responses to what's happening, and they're prophetic documents because they're telling us, they're God's voice through the voice of the church telling us how to respond in a Christian way to these difficulties. So with John Paul II, in 1995, in his letter to women, and then this earlier document, which he released this document in March. Letter to Women was released in June of that year. Abortion was going to be enshrined on the international scene. So he was definitely responding to the fact that the world had embraced a contraceptive mentality, abortion, euthanasia, all these very real cultural problems.
Okay, so that makes very, very good sense. It's not the church inventing something to be worried about, but responding to very practical things that are happening in the world. And anybody who was around back in the late 90s will know that these were battles at the UN. These were battles within countries and among countries. I want to give out the number again, 888-318-7884. But here's another challenge I want to give you about this document, The Gospel of Life. Throughout it, he refers to the Gospel of Life, and I'll give you one sentence. And we're going to kind of look at chapter 2 mostly because it's a very long document. And you know how you can tell it's a very long document? John Paul wrote it. Okay, sorry about that. But,
yes, that's a good point.
He didn't know how to write a short document. But here's my challenge to you, just to start. He writes a lot of sentences like this. In Christ, the Gospel of Life is definitively proclaimed and fully given. What is the difference between saying that and just saying the gospel is definitively proclaimed and fully given? Why does he append this of life to the gospel all throughout this document?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, that's what a great and challenging question. And then I think it relates to your earlier point about why are the popes even responding to cultural things? Why are they responding to political things? I mean, culture is the way that we live, which is what culture is, really demonstrates what we believe. Even the root of the word culture is cult, meaning worship. So what we worship determines how we act toward one another. And then, of course, how we act toward one another, determines our politics. So I think what John Paul II is trying to emphasize here is that at the very heart of the good news, of the gospel, of what we believe, and therefore how we ought to conduct ourselves and live, is that we are here to foster a culture of life. And that the whole thing, the whole business that we're in here is about that God decided to share his very life with his human creatures. That's a pretty huge thing.
Right. And that is something that I'm struck in this chapter 2 from Evangelium Vitae, this idea that he uses a very large number of scriptural references, going all the way. I mean, using book after book after book of the Bible to point out that one of the primary, I think what he's trying to get at, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that one of the primary messages of Scripture all the way through, and of the whole relationship of God with Israel and then with the church, is a message of how much God values people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly correct. And we know from knowing the nature of God that there is absolutely no necessity for him to create it all, right? And certainly not to create human life. And yet, in doing so, in creating people made after his own image and likeness, he has given us this power, this capacity to share in his own life. So if he's going to create in the first place, even though he doesn't need to, and then create us in such a way as to be able to share in his existence, in his life, and he wants that life to be very good and to be very happy and to be very free. In other words, to look as much like his life as possible, which is the whole reason it started in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, you kind of, I was going to read a quote, but you said just what I was going to read from him. He asks the question, why is life good? Why is life a good? And it's funny that, I mean, he sees in the cultural situation, you have to ask this question. I mean, and I wonder what he would say to us now, where, I mean, more and more people are of the opinion that, you know, what the world really needs is less human life. And we even have these weird shows about how great the world would be if there was just no humans on it. So he answers the question. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Simone.
Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean, I think that's a very understandable response. I mean, you know, there's too much human life. Life is miserable. It's unhappy. We need less people. Well, of course, people who aren't living the gospel of life, which is the Christian recommendation for total human flourishing, because if you don't live in accordance with your human nature and the truth, which the church proposes to have, life is miserable. And then if life is miserable, then it's not good. And then so we want to stop the suffering. We want to stop the misery. We want to stop people from being born.
And unfortunately, that's exactly where we are. So he answers the question, why is life a good? Pretty much the way you just did. So I don't know who's plagiarizing who, but this is what he says. This question is found everywhere in the Bible, and from the very first pages, it receives a powerful and amazing answer. The life which God gives man is quite different from the life of all other living creatures, inasmuch as man, although formed from the dust of the earth, is a manifestation of God in the world, a sign of his presence, a trace of his glory. So this is not this is not just pious talk. He's trying to connect this biblical understanding of what the value of human life is with our current cultural moment.
Right. And to stop and reflect on the fact that we have these human powers, we have this capacity to reason, to think, to choose, to self-determine, to feel. These are massive powers. And it gives us ultimately the power to love, and also to procreate and to perpetuate life and love. This is extremely huge, a gift and extremely huge responsibility.
We'll talk more about. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's extraordinary.
I keep stepping on you. Sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry.
888-318-7884 is the number if you want to know about this Catholic idea of the gospel of life, that God has put within us a message of the goodness of life, but he's also emphasized it and re-emphasized it and given it its definitive form in his revelation to Israel and to the church, especially through the person of Jesus Christ. We'd love to talk with you about Evangelium Vitae. Give us a call, 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Faith is a precious gift from God. As the largest religious media network in the world, EWTN has an important role in educating others about our Catholic faith and spreading the good news of salvation. We invite you to explore our numerous pages of historical faith documents, prayers, teachings, and other current issues in Catholicism today. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Simone Rizkallah is our guest, and we're talking about the document Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, a document from 1995 from Pope St. John Paul II. You got to get all of his stuff in there. I still don't know where to put the great in all that, but he's got a lot of stuff because he really is, he deserves all that. What an extraordinary pontificate, what an extraordinary life. Simone is the director of program growth for Endow Groups, which is an apostolate that calls women together to study the important documents of the Catholic Church. If you disagree with what you are hearing, we would love to hear from you. We love having conversations, civil conversations about the world's most important topics. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Simone, I want to give you another challenge because I asked you, why say gospel of life when you could just say gospel? And you gave me a very fine answer. But by doing that, the implication would be that for me to be a person, a good faith Christian, I have to be a pro-life person. There's no wiggle room in there. It seems very exclusive. There's no place for the person who's not pro-life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in one sense, that a Christian who's fully grasped and internalized and understands the gospel will be pro-life. But that doesn't mean if you're a baptized Christian that you can't struggle with, pro-life teachings, or you're not, you could be in your spiritual journey and grapple with it. I'd rather have you stay in the game and wrestle with God on this teaching than just say, well, I'm out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I got you. 888-318-7884, the number 888-31-TRUTH. Simone Rizkallah, our guest. So I'll let you now. I've kind of given you my opening salvo of questions about the document. But what strikes you in this chapter 2? By the way, chapter 2 of Evangelium Vitae is titled, I Came That They May Have Life, the Christian Message Concerning Life. And I wanted to focus on just that part because it's a very long document, but also because this is if we settle this issue, then we settle many issues as Christian people. If we settle on the issue that the gospel really is a gospel of life, and that to embrace the gospel is to be pro-life in every possible way. Let me just turn it over to you for a second, Simone, and give me your thoughts on what you read when you read chapter 2 here.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I'd like to say generally about the document is that this isn't just getting Christians to comply with pro-life laws and teachings, but it's painting a greater vision of the fact that life is meant to be abundant, which is why he starts out with the abundant life. Life is meant to be happy, right? So it's not just great check, we're pro-life, we believe babies should be born, but that we want to flourish and grow into the abundant life, into not just the abundant life that we're promised one day in heaven, but the abundant life here and now, that we can build a culture of life and love here and now that allows for human flourishing to the point where people don't want to be anything but pro-life, because what they're seeing and experiencing is the good. And he talks about that in this document, right? That there's this prioritization of the good, that you cannot separate the good from life. So I just want to say that in general, that it's
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because it immediately strikes me when you say that this gospel of life is not just about every baby needs to be born, but it's about that God wants a flourishing for each of us. He wants a flourishing of life in us. That the critique that we get as Catholics is, wow, you only care about the baby, and I shouldn't use a voice to do the critique, but that's the way the voice sounds to me when the person talks. I'm sure they don't talk like that, but to me it sounds like you only care about the baby till it's born, and then you don't care about it.
Yeah, and I think what I've noticed in my circle of friends, those who are tempted to not be pro-life, they're technically pro-life, but they kind of struggle with it because of all of the different very practical social, cultural, economic situations that would make abortion attractive for a woman, for example. Obviously, that they themselves struggle with happiness, flourishing, joy. And for what I've observed from my friends who are they can't even believe that somebody wouldn't be pro-life, are those who are really living already here and now the abundant life. So I think if we're a miserable culture, well, no wonder we're not more pro-life, because joy and beauty and happiness immediately generates in one's soul a desire to be shared and a desire to be multiplied.
Isn't that something? It's like a downward cycle then, where you develop a kind of negativity about life, and a lot of it, I mean, I'm sure so much of it has to do with, life is increasingly mechanized, life is increasingly cut off from nature, life is increasingly isolated, and then you have 2 generations now of children born to, if it's not their own parents and grandparents, certainly almost everybody around them, they've experienced divorce and kind of the trauma that comes with that. So you end up with a kind of traumatized society, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's not a society that wants children.
Oh, absolutely. And even for Christian men and women who are technically pro-life, the marriage rates are still increasingly getting small. Marriage is going into obscurity. That means that children are not being born. So even for those Christians who are technically pro-life, they're still not getting married. They're still not having children. And I think that's that culture of death creeping in to the church, which is why we're in the midst of the new evangelization.
I can't remember if he uses the phrase culture of death in this document. I'm not remembering at the moment. He does?
Yes. He does.
What do you think of that as a term? I mean, there was always the controversy. Should we be more on? These are old controversies. A lot of people won't remember them. But Cardinal Bernardine's view in Chicago was the seamless garment, that we should care for. That life was like the seamless garment of Christ, and so we had to care for life in all of its manifestations. Mm-hmm. But John Paul went more with the culture of life, culture of death, which is a much more black and white thing. What do you make of his use of these terms, culture of life and culture of death?
I like them. I like them because they're clear categories. Either we have behaviors that are leading to human flourishing, or we are getting more comfortable and permitting behaviors in a culture that are leading to not being fruitful and multiplying, or not being happy. And he talks about this in chapter 2 of, God gives man a lot of power, not just being made in his image and likeness, but dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. Dominion over this possibility to co-create with God, in children, but then man's dominion goes too far. He says it's not an absolute power. You can't decide when someone's going to die. That's when man's dominion has bad boundaries, because those are where just
Bad
bad boundaries. That's where God's power kicks in. So I like the culture of life and death dichotomy, because it's just very clear. Either there are behaviors that are leading to happiness, joy, flourishment, multiplication, or not. And that's the line in the stand. God's in charge of life and death.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from young people, because what I'll propose to you when we come back, and I will try to get to callers. Some callers are a little off topic today, so if you want to talk about the culture of life, the culture of death, the culture wars, Evangelium Vitae, we'd love to talk with you. 888-318-7884. But with a lot of the movements, the justice movements, the environmental movement, young people are kind of being cowed out of having children. We'll talk about that when we get back. Catholic Answers Live is 25 years old. That's a quarter century helping people come into deeper communion with the Catholic faith. As we move into our second quarter century, please help us reach thousands more by becoming a Society 315 monthly donor. Right now, when you join Society 315 at a monthly giving level of $25 or more, we've added some extra perks to the other great benefits we already offer members. Go to givecatholic.com and choose the monthly option to start your donation.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with Why We're
Hi, this is Janet Benkovic-Williams. There's nothing like Women of Grace to explain the truth of our faith, Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Simone Vizcala, our guest. We're delighted to be able to announce today that Simone is our newest affiliate apologist. This has been, I do not know if it does anything good for the affiliate apologist, but it has been nothing but good. It has paid nothing but dividends for us here at Catholic Answers, and we expect the same from the relationship with Simone. If you have questions for her, 888-318-7884, or perhaps you have a challenge, that's also welcome, 888-318-7884. We're talking about a document that came out in 1995 called Evangelium Vitae. It's striking to read it, Simone, today. It doesn't seem like it's aged at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's even more relevant. I feel that way with so much of what John Paul writes. He's completely a prophetic voice. It's like he knew, he probably did know what was going to happen.
Well, yeah, and there's a certain way in which there's a kind of a natural prophecy, I think, that comes from being formed in the faith, where you just have the spiritual gift of wisdom and insight, and you can see these things coming. But he's very, very clear and very, very helpful. We talked a little bit about abortion. Why does he get into? All right, let's just mention some of the other things he gets into. Euthanasia. Why is he getting into that, and what does he have to say about it?
Yeah, I think that goes back to our discussion about the abundant life, that this is about a total full, flourishing, happy life here and now. And so it can't just be this, okay, let's not abort the babies, but let's have a respect and a reverence. And he talks about this a lot, a reverence for the human person in every stage of life, and including when they're most weak, which is not just at the beginning of our lives, but also at the end of our lives. And back to that whole we have to have better boundaries with God. We certainly can't. We certainly can't determine, when human life ends, because God co-creates with us, and He's the determiner of the beginning and the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's, the beginning and the end. So we really, it's not our job to get in the way of the gift. And if life is a gift, and that's what we believe, no matter how painful, difficult, suffering there might be at the end of one's life. And he talks about, just like misguided, well-intentioned, but misguided actions that seek to prematurely end the life of the human soul. That's really getting in the way of someone's relationship with God, because He gets to determine when they get to pass into eternal life.
Right. He's not done with them, but we're just because we're done with them.
Right, for whatever exactly, to spare ourselves of suffering, to want to spare them of their journey in suffering, their cross, their Good Friday moment. I mean, they might just be, in terms of the totalitarian regimes that he witnessed in Nazism and communism, certainly it's just inconvenient, useless to the state. I mean, if you think about the sort of people that are for these things, do you really want to be aligned with them?
Yeah. That's interesting that you drew on his history, because he lived under the two most murderous systems in the history of the world. He lived under the Nazis and he lived under the Soviet communists.
Yeah, another reason why he used culture of death, culture of life. I mean, he really saw a stark contrast.
Yeah. I have some more categories I want to ask you about, but I do want to get to the phones. I've been putting off talking with people on the phone. So let's go to Indiana. Leanna in Indiana, thank you for your call. You are on with Simone Rizcala. Go ahead with your question or comment. Beautiful. Wait, hang on a quick sec. I'm sorry to interrupt you. They say they can't hear the caller on Facebook, Zach. Do you have them potted up? Do you have her potted up? Okay, go ahead. Continue with your point. I'm sorry I interrupted you. It's just...
Yeah, so it's okay. That's quite all right. So I don't know if I'm going to articulate it well, but my struggle is I feel that I'm pro-life, but I made a terrible, horrible mistake that I have to live with, and it kept me from converting for years, and I finally forgave myself and went to spiritual direction on a weekly basis and kind of worked through it. It's still a scar, there's no doubt about it. But I also feel that human has free will, and the choices that they make, they have to deal with the consequences. So I'm trying to figure out that it's like a dichotomy to me, that yes, I feel pro-life and I know what it is. I was misguided and this and that, but now that I see the light and I have God and everything, I just still, even though I am so faithful and practice my religion, it's so rich and beautiful, and I struggle with that person still has free will. So can you help me understand my feelings on that? Because I struggle with that sometimes.
Okay. Simone?
Yeah, I hope I understand what you're asking, but in terms of free will, yes, I don't think here we're really discussing whether, abortion should be legal or not, although, of course, we don't think it should. But the point being that, yes, God certainly made us free and we have free will. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the complete powers that we have and the responsibility that we have. And he knew when he created us with freedom that it would be a risk, a risk. And he knew we would abuse it and misuse it. He still found it worth it to give us this gift, full well knowing that we would abuse it and gravely abuse it, because life is preferable. He found creating us and proposing a life with him now and in eternity preferable to the risk of the misuse of our freedom. So I don't know if that helps you out. I mean, I'm so glad to hear your story. We all have sins that have scarred and traumatized us. And thank God for God's mercy, forgiveness, and his knowledge of all the things that will come to be in all of our lives that we all have to contend with. But I think the thing that I keep wanting to emphasize to the Christian, to people who are Christian and people who are discerning about becoming a Christian is to stay in the game. You will misuse your freedom. You're a sinner. You're weak. God knows it. He's made allotment for it. But he still felt that it was worth it to create us and to engage in relationship with us, and has a plan to restore and redeem everything. And that's why we can be joyful even in the midst of all of our errors.
Leanna, does that help you?
It does. It does. And I thank you, and thank you for your program. I'm a truck driver, and I listen to you every night on the radio, so it's lovely. Just keep up the good work.
Oh, very nice.
God is good, that's for sure.
That makes us feel good. God is good. Yeah.
Every night.
Every night
I do.
We're with you in the truck.
I learn so much, and it feeds me. You know, you are for 10 hours, Monday through Friday. You're with me, and I'm with you, and thank you so much for everything you do. And thanks for helping me process my thoughts.
Well, thank you, Leanna. I very much appreciate it. What a great call. What a wonderful story that you have. I don't think that Leanna's idea that, I do believe what the church teaches. I do accept what the church teaches. There's still some part of me that thinks it's, let's say we should be left up to a woman and her doctor, as they say, that kind of thing. There's still some part of me that is not ready to say I'm 100% in. And I'm not saying that that's what Leanna's point was exactly, but certainly that point that is an idea that many people in the church do in fact struggle with, Simone.
Yeah, and I think here the thing to focus on is because there are Christians who are called to a political vocation. That is not my calling, and that's not yours either, Si. Our call here is to evangelize and to educate. And I think that the more that we do that, which is why John Paul II so much believed in education over politics. I mean, I heard from George Weigel that he barely even read a newspaper, because if you can really convert hearts and minds, that changes culture. Culture informs politics. So it's not that we don't have to do our political work, but political work is the least powerful work. Mm-hmm. The spiritual and educational and cultural work is much more powerful than any kind of political. I mean, if that weren't true, there's no way a man like John Paul II could almost single-handedly, not exactly single-handedly, bring down communism in Poland.
Yeah.
Right. It was spiritual and cultural power. Once he captivated the hearts and minds of the Polish people that they were a Catholic nation and called down the Holy Spirit on June 2nd, 1979, where he takes a trip to Poland and says, "Come, Holy Spirit." I mean, that was the beginning of the Solidarity movement, which then eventually led to the downfall of communism, right? But it started with the Holy Spirit. It started with the mind. It started with building people up to, life is good. And we're going to fight for not just bare minimum existence according to whatever the communists say is okay, but the full abundant life that we are called to and promised here and later. So I think in that case, I understand why people might be struggling with should we make it legal or not legal? Don't people have human freedom? But for the most of us who don't have a political vocation, let's spend our time educating each other and painting a great vision for what a culture of life can look like where abortion is unthinkable.
888-318-7884 is the number. I can't believe it. We're already ready to go to another break. So I got to take this break, Simone. We're talking about Evangelium Vitae, one of the great encyclicals from Pope John Paul the Great. Your calls are welcome, 888-318-7884. I have to say, I don't know if I can trust a Pope who didn't read the New York Times. It just doesn't seem... Does that seem right to you? He skipped the Times every morning with his breakfast? Oh, well, I'll just have to adjust to it. Right back.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Hi, I'm Janet Williams, and I want to invite you to join me at the EWTN Family Celebration in Phoenix. I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Make your plans now to attend the EWTN Family Celebration October 1st at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Find out how you can be a part at EWTN.com/family celebration.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Simone Riscala is our guest. She is the director of program development for Endow, in which women get together and read the documents of the Catholic Church and grow together and make friendships and all of that. And Simone is also now an affiliate apologist here, and I already have a problem with her. I mean, at the break, I said, let's do this next, and she said, no, let's do this. I can't have that, Simone. What I say goes. But no, you wanted to read a part of especially because of the chat we just had with Leanna in Indiana. Or she might be out of Indiana by now. I don't know. She's driving a truck, so she could have passed into another state. Maybe she's in Illinois now. Wait, hang on. Does Illinois touch Indiana, Darren? It does. Okay, good. Oh, that was close. But you wanted to read what John Paul had to say to women who have been through an abortion.
Yeah, I do. Just in case there are listeners who've made that choice, and if they have, and I hope they have sought forgiveness and healing. And for those who are looking for a way to accompany women in their lives who have made that choice, which is, I think, now one out of three, it's just, you know someone who's had an abortion, whether you realize it or not. So this is what he says. This is in paragraph 99, which is one of my favorite sections of this document. He says, I would like now to say a special word to women who have had an abortion. The Church is aware of the many factors which may have influenced your decision, and she does not doubt that in many cases it was a painful and even shattering decision. The wound in your heart may not yet have healed. Certainly what happened was and remains terribly wrong, but do not give in to discouragement and do not lose hope. Try rather to understand what happened and face it honestly. If you have not already done so, give yourselves over with humility and trust to repentance. The Father of mercies is ready to give you his forgiveness and his peace in the sacrament of reconciliation. You will come to understand that nothing is definitively lost, and you will be able to ask forgiveness from your child who is now living in the Lord. With the friendly and expert help and advice of other people, and as a result of your own painful experience, you can be among the most eloquent defenders of everyone's right to life. Through your commitment to life, whether by accepting the birth of other children or by welcoming and caring for those most in need of someone to be close to them, you will become promoters of a new way of looking at human life.
First of all, it's beautiful what he said, and I hope that that will be of comfort to many people. If you'd like to comment on it, we'd be happy to take your call. Simone will be with us for another 15 minutes or so, 888-318-7884. But it does also strike me again that thing that you said about we're not called to be politicians, that's actually really helpful. And it does seem to me that he, again, is he's interested in reaching the person, not in like, I don't know, creating a movement or something. It just seems that his real concern as Pope was to reach the person, the individual.
Exactly. And it's the most powerful means, because we don't just want people to comply in a legalistic way. Jesus asks us to love God with our whole hearts, mind, soul, and strength, which is to be fundamentally pro-life is at some point to recognize that your life is good, that you are a gift, and that you're beloved by God, and you bring him glory in a way in eternity that no other being can or ever will.
888-318-7884 is the number, 888-31-TRUTH. He does have a section here in chapter 2 where he talks about sin and what sin has done to us. And I do think it is relevant, and I want to ask you about what you see as the relevant part of it to the conversation about abortion and euthanasia and all of the life issues, so to speak, in which he says sin diminishes our view of God or distorts our view of God. And I'm paraphrasing now. But he says it's equally important to see that sin distorts our view of ourselves, and that we don't see the value of ourselves or our fellow human beings in the way that we should because of the fall of humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always that connotation with sin that seems like very blamey and shamey. But when looked at honestly, sin, as the Catechism states, is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. And it distorts our relationship with God, just as you said. It distorts our relationship with our neighbor. It distorts our relationship with ourselves. So if the gospel is the gospel of life, and at the heart of life is love and relationship, sin is what destroys our relationship with everything worth having a relationship with. And because of that distortion of our conscience, of our reason, of all of that, then we start to look down on ourselves. We start to not see ourselves in our full glory and dignity. And if we can't see ourselves in our full glory and dignity, how then can we then go out and look at our neighbors with glory and dignity? Which is what I was saying earlier about once you have embraced your own goodness, it becomes kind of a non-negotiable that you're going to look at every other human life as also infinitely worthy, infinitely good, and infinitely sacred and worth fighting for.
Okay, so before I went to the break, I was mentioning this, and I'd like to get your take on this, because it does seem to me that part of the anti-life kind of or culture of death that being fostered in our society is actually not because of ill will, but because of a kind of a manipulated goodwill in people. And I see that particularly, and I'll just tell you, I'll give you a little example. We had rain here in California, and it was quite extraordinary, the amount of rain we got. And it happens every 5 or 10 years. We get these big rains. And but this young woman that I know, she said, said something about global warming. How can people not believe in global warming, given this? And her kind of conclusion in life is that you shouldn't have too many children because, look at the state of the world. Look what we humans are doing to it. And I think none of that is bad will on her part. She's not trying to do something evil or anything, but she's been convinced of a certain view of kind of a danger that we face. And it just so happens, and I don't believe this is coincidental at all, that the cure for so many of these dangers that we're constantly alerted to in the media is for there to be fewer of us. Just have less people, and there'll be less danger. And so I do think there's a lot of young women, for example, who they're not going to have kids or many kids, maybe more than one, because they love the planet. And they're not idiots. Yeah. They're not horrible people. They're trying to do something right.
Yeah, I think those positions are very understandable and very relatable. And I think it goes back to what I was saying about like the psychology of things. If you yourself are looking around at kind of the disaster that humans have, like, we've made a mess of things. So it seems reasonable to say, you know what, we've made a mess of things. We're not trustworthy. Let's just like cap the capacity, to
make a mess.
Let's just like not to make a mess.
Yeah.
So it's understandable. And you can kind of look at God and be like, look, God, you gave us dominion over everything, but we obviously haven't stewarded your creation or each other well. So we're going to like not do the whole like be fruitful and multiply thing. I mean, it's totally understandable. So I think there's two things at play. One, the psychology of that, or of, are we going to take matters into our own hands and say, you know, God, thanks for giving us this responsibility. We say no. Or are we going to trust God and say, actually, he believes that the solution to the world's problems are actually life, apostolic creativity, and that people who, and this is why it's so important for Christians to be happy, to live the abundant life, because when we're happy and stepping into our personal vocations, we're creating subcultures in this postmodern culture where Christianity works. Because when Christianity is doing Christianity, it's building civilization. Right? Christianity built Western civilization. The height of European civilization is Christian. So I think we need to, like, one, study our history. We've done it before. We can do it again. Two, become brilliant, happy, and start to build, looking at, again, Mother Teresa, who went to a place that you could say is the most impractical place in the world and builds a $2 billion business and is teaching NFP to like poor Hindu women in the streets, right? Like, this is a woman who really embraced the gospel of life and transformed an entire subculture because of it. So I think we need to just be saints and do what we do best. But I think that position's understandable. I also think we need to challenge people like that and with history, with science, and say, actually, we don't have enough people. We're in a crisis because of a winter demographic, and there's actually a great documentary called Winter Demographic, where it shows from a scientific and sociological perspective what's happening because we don't have enough people being born, right? So I think we have to challenge those people and say, I see where you're coming from, but here are the facts.
Yeah, and the again, that Catholic call to life is a call, like, it's not a puritanical call. It's a call that, when you think of like who lives the Catholic life really well, you think of like the 1900s big Italian family, or the Mexican village or something. Like the Catholic life is lived in this communal, festive, loving, mutually interdependent, caring way. That's what we're looking for. We need to find a way to do that works, like you said, in the postmodern world. But is that what you mean by apostolic creativity? Like, find ways to...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think they're just looking at the saints who've like changed the cultures that they were in. We need to be those saints. And yeah, I mean, happy families is the most provocative way to make a case for the culture of life, right? Because who doesn't want to be part of a happy family? What at the end of the day converts anybody except happiness? And most of the time, it's like Chesterton said, there's nothing more extraordinary than an ordinary man and his ordinary wife and their ordinary children. I mean, that's the dream that won't die. So I think the happier we are, the more the pro-life message will be easier for people to embrace.
I hope people will be inspired and read Evangelium Vitae, or at least chapter 2 of Evangelium Vitae, of which we discuss several sentences. That's how far you can get in an hour. I want to let you know Simone Rizkallah is going to be here in San Diego speaking on the 17th of February. The Catholic Church, oppressor of women, ? I don't know, but I'm 93% sure she's going to say no to Catholic Church, but she's going to talk about the place of women in the Catholic Church, the understanding of this whole male-female thing from a Catholic perspective. We're looking forward to hosting you out here, Simone.
I'm really looking forward to it, Cy. Thank you.
Thanks for agreeing to be an affiliate of ours as well.
No, it's my pleasure. Love it. Love you guys.
Coming up next, Michael Lofton. We're going to talk about the Second Vatican Council. If you got complaints, if you got challenges, to the Second Vatican Council, perfect hour for you. We'll do that next on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we're going to talk about the Second Vatican Council, and we're leaving it open to is there a challenge that you've heard about the Second Vatican Council you'd like to address? Maybe there's a challenge that you'd like to make about the Second Vatican Council. And this all comes from the fact that in recent years, there seems to be a more and more kind of visceral objection to the council and even a rejection of the council in some areas. And that's not good. So if you're in that position and you'd like to discuss it, we would love to discuss it with you. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Here to help us do that is Michael Lofton, who is the proprietor of the Reason and Theology podcast, very popular podcast in which he discusses all kinds of issues having to do with the doctrines of the church, the history, the teachings of the church, and gets into some specific areas with regularity. For example, the Orthodox Catholic dialogue, and he makes friends that way. And I'm going to be honest with you, he makes enemies that way. Because if you're going to stand up for the truth, you're going to have both. Michael Lofton, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Cy, thanks for having me back on.
Maybe I shouldn't have said enemies. There, you have opponents out there.
Friction, for sure.
A little bit of friction. Okay, that wasn't a charitable way to say it. If you want to talk about the Second Vatican Council, give us a call, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Now, do you buy my premise that in recent years we're seeing a more kind of sustained and organized objection to the Second Vatican Council than we had seen during the Pope John Paul II years?
I think so. I think especially with the present pontificate, we're starting to see people aggressively moving away from the Second Vatican Council. But this time it's not coming from the left. This time it's coming from an extreme right position in some instances, as well as the left. So we're getting it from both sides.
Yeah, right. Nobody's happy. I guess, one thing you can always say about that is, there were times in the life and ministry of Jesus when nobody was happy, when barely even the apostles hung on. So, that can be kind of a little bit mean, because then you're implying, my position is like the Jesus position. I never like it when people do that. But in this case, you can say it. I'm not saying my position. I'm saying the church's position has become unpopular, and that is analogous to what happened with Jesus.
That's certainly the case. I'm reminded of John 6, where that's exactly what happened. Jesus preached a hard saying, as it's called, and many, many of his disciples turned away from him at that moment. And you'll note, however, Jesus did not say, wait, come back, I'm going to change my teaching. He didn't do that.
No, he did not. But I personally think that the reason he did not is that he's God. And he's not going to change his teaching for someone else. I throw that out there for you.
That's true.
888-318-7884. All right, so you agree with my basic premise, but what's the remedy? The remedy to for example, are there things in the council that need to be rephrased or kind of expanded on so that people will have an idea, okay, I can get behind it that way? Are there things in the council that we just need to know better in order to embrace the council?
All of the above. Certainly some things probably do need to be rephrased. Not that in and of themselves they were wrong or misleading, but some things have been misinterpreted. However, the Vatican has done a decent job of clarifying some of those, although I think some additional work could be done there. But in addition to maybe rephrasing things and clarifying things, I'm going with Pope Benedict XVI in his 2005 Christmas address to the Roman Curia, where he emphasized the fact that the main issue right now that we have had with the Second Vatican Council is a failure to really implement the Second Vatican Council per the text. A lot of people gravitate towards what's called the spirit of Vatican II, basically the effectively an idea behind it rather than what the text in fact says. And this idea, conveniently for some people, is going to be one of dissent and departure from the traditional faith. And Benedict wanted to correct that and say, no, if you want to be faithful to the council, you actually need to be faithful to the text itself, not some kind of nefarious spirit that is vague and is really at odds with the tradition of the church.
Okay, so I'm going to propose to you something that I don't think it's that controversial, but it's, and I don't mean it in a mean-spirited way, but there are those in the last 60 years almost 60 years since the conclusion of the council, who actually have benefited from being somewhat, making the council opaque rather than clear. Because where the council wanted to reform, there's some who want to remake. And if you can kind of be unclear about what the council actually said, and refer to things like the spirit of the council, well, then you've got a little leg up on remaking the church into something else.
Yeah, but in the case where people do that, and I agree they do that, they're actually going completely against the very purpose of having the Second Vatican Council. If you look at the opening speech of Pope John XXIII, who opened the Second Vatican Council, he notes in his opening speech, the primary task of the Second Vatican Council is to guard and preserve the deposit of faith, that tradition that has been handed down to us. And then he says, second to that is to present it in a way that the modern man understands. So to guard and preserve, not to change it, but to just simply present it in a way that modern man can understand. That was the purpose of it, not to change or abandon the apostolic faith. So people who try to exploit it for those purposes are completely going against the very purpose of the Second Vatican Council. And so I don't see how they can even call that the spirit of Vatican II. The spirit is the same thing as the text itself, to preserve the tradition of the apostles and to communicate it in the world today.
So what was wrong with the church that we needed that?
I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong as far as the doctrines of the church. However, there was a breakdown in the way we were communicating these things. And don't get me wrong, I love the manualists and the manualist tradition, but there was a certain feel to the presentation that we would give to the faith that was pretty cold and distant, and the average person who wasn't trained in theology probably wouldn't benefit very much from. And so what John the 23rd wanted to do is say, look, let's just take the faith that we have. We're not going to modify it, but let's maybe communicate it in a way that your average person who doesn't maybe have a theology degree could benefit from. And that's a great thing. We want to do that.
So maybe we were tending towards presenting the faith as a sort of system of thought rather than a thing born of a person, Jesus Christ, and always related to that person.
That's a good way to put it. And also that we weren't necessarily applying it to our situation today.
Yeah.
We were maybe applying it to a situation that's outdated. With the fact that we have modern society, we're not going to compromise the faith due to modern society, but we do need to recognize that things have changed. And so in the way that we present the one true faith, we're going to have to mold it to modern society in a way that they can understand and appreciate. But that does not mean that we somehow abandon the faith or compromise in any way.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So every single line filled up already. So I'm going to go to the phones because people want to talk to you about the Second Vatican Council, all right?
Okay.
Michael Lofton from Reason and Theology is our guest, an affiliate apologist here at Catholic Answers. I'm going to say it. He's the longest serving affiliate apologist now at Catholic Answers, and it's been a great boon to us. I think it's Joan in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, listening on Catholic.com. Is that right? Is it Joan?
Yes, I'm Joanne, actually.
Oh, Joanne, I beg your pardon. I read it wrong. Joanne, go ahead with what you have for Michael.
Yes, yeah. I'm just in the middle of a wonderful graduate theology program at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I just finished a Vatican II course, and there's just some things that are hanging around in my mind. And one is on if you think that Catholics are finding it difficult to make good moral judgments, for example, on abortion and euthanasia that we were just talking about with another speaker, because Gaudium Spes and Dignitatis Humanae, it sort of puts more priority on the dignity of conscience rather than the dignity of universal norms to make those particular good decisions in our lives. Do you think that, well, we're approaching it with a hermeneutic of continuity, but Do you think that there was some parts of the teachings on conscience in those documents that are kind of leading, Catholics astray in some way?
I don't have any evidence that that was the intention of the bishops, or that anything in the documents themselves would, lend themselves to somebody who wants to emphasize the primacy of conscience over and against the teaching authority of the church. I know some people could, using a hermeneutic of rupture, could maybe read things like that, but frankly, if we take the hermeneutic of rupture, we could read the Old Testament in all kinds of ways that are discontinuous with the New Testament and level plenty of criticisms against the apostles and against Jesus. And so, however, if we're using the hermeneutic of continuity, as it's called, or the hermeneutic of reform, as Benedict put it in his Christmas address, I think that we're going to see, okay, we need to read the Second Vatican Council in light of tradition, not as opposed to it. So again, I don't see anything in the documents themselves that would say, okay, you can ultimately go with what your conscience says on a particular matter of faith and morals over and against the authority of the church. If that's in the Second Vatican Council, I sure haven't seen it, and I would love to see it.
But is that one of those things that is a consequence sort of the way the council was received, that people did start thinking that way, that my conscience is almost like my God?
Some people did receive it that way, but I would say not due to the council itself or the intentions of the fathers who are at the Second Vatican Council, but certainly due to maybe the intentions of those who want to deliberately overturn some things that they weren't appreciative of in sacred tradition, especially Humanae Vitae.
What do you think, Joanne?
Yeah, just one more comment, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
I guess in Veritatis Splendor, St. John Paul II, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he came across as saying something to the effect that the natural law or universal norms are subordinated to subjective conscience. He said something to that extent. So I'm just challenging you in saying that there was sort of some type of reference to that, perhaps to that part of the document in Dignitatis Humanae. I think it was number 3 in particular. But that's just some reference that I had come across.
You're saying the way that you read the document, or some people have read the document, is that somehow one's conscience is the natural law is actually subordinate to one's conscience. Did I understand that correctly? To a more subjective conscience, right? So, yeah. So using your subjective conscience would be more important than the natural law or reason, or a Thomist kind of way.
Sorry, Joanne, but for both of you, isn't this? It is a delicate question in the sense that if a conscience is formed in a certain way, you are obliged to follow your conscience. That doesn't mean that your conscience is always right, but you do have the obligation to follow your conscience, so long as you've done everything you can to try to know the true and the good. So it does strike me that this, even apart from a conversation about the Second Vatican Council, is a bit of a nuanced thing, Joanne.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. Yeah, I just thought I'd put it out there, and thank you for your comments.
Well, I don't think. Thank you, Joanne. I don't think there's any doubt that the idea, since the Second Vatican Council, the idea of conscience has been grossly abused in a lot of Catholic literature, in a lot of Catholic commentary. Would you agree with that, Michael?
I do agree, and I also agree with what you said before. And in fact, that's where I was going to go next, because I would say, okay, if a person believes in their conscience that they need to do X, they are obligated to follow their conscience. But let's say X is wrong. Are they still obligated to do it? Immediately speaking, they are obligated to follow their conscience. However, when they have more time, to prepare, they do need to better form their conscience. And they also do have and have had the duty of forming their conscience up into that moment. So it is kind of a delicate matter.
Okay.
Joanne, thank you. I really appreciate the high level of conversation because that's exactly what we need to dig into the Second Vatican Council. There's 1.5 million people on the phones, though, and I have to go to a break, so I will go to that break and get to it's 1.5 million. That's what it says right now. Not exactly true, but Joanne, thank you so much. We'll be right back with more. We're discussing the Second Vatican Council with Michael Lofton on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Michael Lofton is our guest. We're talking about the Second Vatican Council, which maybe surprisingly to me, I have to say surprisingly to me, if you had asked me 20 years ago, in 2023, would the documents of the Second Vatican Council be more or less controversial? I'd have said less. I thought that the great papacy of John Paul, and then the papacy of Benedict, and this was of course before Francis came. It seemed that we were on a trajectory towards kind of digesting and accepting and starting to make progress, but that doesn't seem to be what happened. But pretty much everything that's happened in the last 20 years, I wouldn't have told you that that's what was going to happen. I didn't see most of it coming. I'm no prophet in that way. So this increasing, in some places, hostility, but in more places, suspicion of the Second Vatican Council is the reason for this show today. If you got challenges for the Second Vatican Council, Michael Lofton is here to help us address. The number is 888-318-7884. We're going now to Terre Haute, Indiana. Derek in Terre Haute, listening on Catholic.com. We're glad you're here, Derek. Go ahead with your question or comment for Michael.
Hello. I think that many priests do not follow along Second Vatican Council, and they promote pro-choice instead of life. And I think some priests seem to let their parishioners get away with a little too much and still receive the host. I mean, not many, but there might be some that do. And it seems like...
Yeah. Let's get a response from Michael, Derek.
Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. I do think that that's some constructive criticism that we could offer with some quarters of the church. You did note there from the Second Vatican Council that the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. And so if it is, surely we should be handling the sacred host better. And yeah, I do agree that in some instances with various ways of reception, sure, that's probably not being done as best as it should. So I agree with you. I think there's some valid criticism there.
Derek, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. I suppose there's nothing that, again, this might be one of those ones, Michael, where you would say there's nothing in the documents of the council that push us in that direction. It's the reception of the council that has left us with this casual attitude about the Eucharist.
I agree, and I think if you read the first document of the Second Vatican Council, Sacrosanctum Concilium, I think if you read that, which is the document on the reform of the sacred liturgy, I don't think you could come away with an impious or irreverent view of the sacred host after reading that.
Derek, again, thank you. I appreciate that. As I said, all lines full. Well, now one line open, 888-318-7884. The number going to South Dakota, where Dan is listening on Real Presence Radio. Dan, go ahead with your question or comment on the Second Vatican Council for Michael Lofton.
Thank you for taking my call. I guess my question is, in light of the way that the council was implemented, and even though we have tried to make some inroads over the last 10, 15 years as to correcting some of the incorrect ways that the council was implemented, do you think that we can get to the point where we are actually implementing according to the documents that were promulgated? The documents are beautiful, and what's in there is really good, but I don't always see that.
I do think that we can get to that point if we better inform ourselves about the documents, and we could start by reading them, because I often hear from some people who are pretty high up in the church and should certainly know the documents of the Second Vatican Council, and they'll say things and attribute it to Vatican II, and certainly Vatican II did not justify those things. So it just shows that there's a lack of awareness in actually reading the primary sources, that is the text itself. And this isn't just a deficiency on part of maybe some who are in leadership. It's also on part of those who are, just your average faithful and laity. I think all of us need to be better informed about Vatican II. The more we do that, the less it's going to be used to justify abuses.
But Dan, does that satisfy you?
Yeah. I'm just, that's just a curiosity thing.
I wonder how.
I am one that has read all the documents, but I just don't see it implemented the way it. We went way south in the beginning.
I think over a period of time, however, we could have a sufficient implementation. I think of some of our other ecumenical councils in the past. They took a very long time to implement. I think of the reception of Nicaea I, our first ecumenical council. That was certainly a disaster. Not that the council was a disaster, but perhaps the reception of it was. And it took a while before we really received it. In fact, we had to call another ecumenical council to kind of receive the first ecumenical council.
That's why we got number 2.
Yeah.
So, Dan, I thank you very much. I wonder, though, do you have any thoughts on how? Should we be, encouraging pastors to do study groups on these documents? Or, I know, I don't even know if you can trust some Catholic universities to teach the documents, but others would do a brilliant job on it. But how are we going to get people to know what's actually in those documents? I'm asking you, Michael.
Oh, I thought you were asking the caller. Okay, I apologize. I was eagerly awaiting an answer.
I know you look like you were eagerly like, I can't wait to hear what Dan has to say about this.
I didn't hear what he was going to say. Yeah, what Benedict really emphasized, again, going back to that 2005 Christmas address, was, again, becoming more familiar with the text itself. I do think that you had some good suggestions there. Maybe perhaps have the parish priest who goes over and gives a presentation on them, or perhaps somebody who's well-trained on the local level. That certainly would help.
Yeah, it would. Maybe that's something we could do better at Catholic Answers. I don't know. We have to think about that, about helping to present the documents of the Second Vatican Council. Because, as I said, there is some hostility to them, but there's even more painful in some ways is the broad suspicion rather than the pockets of hostility. It's the broad suspicion about the council that's worrisome.
That's true, and I have seen some people where they're starting to do classes on Vatican II, explaining the documents of them, and they're obviously doing them from an Orthodox perspective. So I think that's pretty helpful as well, and they're making them available online.
Alex, excuse me, that was Dan. Thank you, Dan, very much. Alex is next in Texas, watching on YouTube. Alex, go ahead with your question or comment on the Second Vatican Council for Michael Lofton.
Just had a question about communion. So, obviously pre-Vatican II, we, took communion. We'd kneel, and the priest would then place it on your tongue. It seemed like it was a pretty efficient way of doing it, and it also respected Jesus in the Eucharist. I just was wondering why we went to placing it in the hand when it seems like it could cause a lot of issues, either with someone like sneaking and desecrating the host, or, it's just like the thought of putting Jesus in our hands, it's a little weird to me. I'm having trouble here. Maybe y'all guys could help me out with it.
Yeah, there's much to be said here. Well, first, there's nothing in the Second Vatican Council that mandates communion on the hand. However, it is within the authority of the Church to mandate that post the Ecumenical Council, which it did allow for. It doesn't necessarily require it. It does allow you to receive either kneeling and on the tongue or on the hand in the Roman Rite. In fact, you have a right to receive either way in the Roman Rite. However, I will say this, even though I personally think the best mode of reception in the Roman Rite right now, due to our circumstances, people are often very irreverent in their mode of reception. I do think kneeling on the tongue is preferred, but I guess when we come on the other,
can we do it on the break?
I'll finish up there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Alex, hang on, because Michael heard the music and he was right. We have to take this break. We can't get out of this one, but we'll come back and talk more about the reception of the Eucharist and how that has changed since the Second Vatican Council. We're talking about the Second Vatican Council with Michael Lofton. Your call's welcome. 888-31-TRUTH.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Catholic Answers Live is 25 years old. That's a quarter century helping people come into deeper communion with the Catholic faith. As we move into our second quarter century, please help us reach thousands more by becoming a Society 315 monthly donor. Right now, when you join Society 315 at a monthly giving level of $25 or more, we've added some extra perks to the other great benefits we already offer members. Go to GiveCatholic.com and choose the monthly option to start your donation.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Benkovic-Williams. There's nothing like Women of Grace to explain the truth of our faith, Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Alex is still on the phone from before the break, and Michael is still about to address his question. So we call that a hermeneutic of continuity with what went on before the break. It's not a hermeneutic of rupture with what went on before the break. So Alex is saying, well, you know, this Second Vatican Council changed the way we receive communion. It has led to a kind of irreverence and even a failure to even understand the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Michael, you were addressing that before we just went to the break.
Right. So just to briefly recap, Vatican II did not mandate communion on the hand. In fact, it's not even mandated now. One has the option in the Roman Rite to receive either kneeling and on the tongue or on the hand, with some very, very rare exceptions to that. Now, that being said, I also would note that I do think the best mode of reception right now in the Roman Rite, due to the fact that so many people receive it in a very careless way on the hand, probably would be to emphasize and stress communion on the tongue. So though I may think that that's probably the most prudential way to move forward, I will, however, defend communion on the hand per se, because first of all, it is apostolic. This is the way that the apostles distributed Holy Communion. It's also the dominant form of the first millennium. Communion on the tongue while kneeling was not common, either in East or West. And also in the Eastern tradition today, we tend to use a liturgical spoon. That also wasn't the common practice, even in the East in the first millennium. Again, both East and West, the common method of reception was communion in the hand. So there was a reference there about the laity receiving communion. It may feel impious to touch the sacred host. I don't think that really appreciates the fact, and I know Aquinas, with all due respect, used that argument. I don't think that appreciates the fact that for the first millennium, that was the venerable tradition, and they had no scruples about laity touching the Eucharist. In fact, laity were able to often, in many cases, take the Eucharist home and self-communicate on a daily basis in some instances, even outside of times of persecution. I'm not saying that that's recommended today, but what I am saying is I don't think that we can think that these things are intrinsically evil or sinful in and of themselves. So though I may not think that communion in the hand is best way to receive communion today in the Roman Rite practically, I don't want to go to the other extreme and think that somehow there's something wrong with it or it's intrinsically evil.
What do you think, Alex?
That helps out a lot. Thanks, guys. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I actually didn't know all of that you just said about reception in the hand. I'm one of those, and this has nothing to do with, because I am not a literate person when it comes to liturgy. Just from my personal experience, I have always liked the altar rail. I like to kneel with and it seems, as Alex said, both efficient and reverent. It has both qualities. So, but it's fascinating to hear what you just said about. I mean, if the church did something for 1,000 years, you can't turn around and go, well, that's a bad thing to do, because the church didn't do bad for 1,000 years.
Right. And the irony, it's communion kneeling on the tongue that is the innovation. Now,
isn't that interesting?
I'm not saying it's a bad innovation.
Right.
I actually think it's a helpful one, but make no mistake about it, it is an innovation.
Thanks, Alex. Let's go to Heather in Freehold, New Jersey, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Heather, we're very glad you're here. Go ahead with your question or comment about the Second Vatican Council for our guest, Michael Lofton.
Hey, thank you so much. So I think my first question is about ecumenism. I don't understand, why should I even bother being Catholic if all roads lead to salvation, right? If Muslims and Jews and pagans and everybody has a chance at salvation, why would I even bother practicing this religion? And I'll start with that.
Yeah, great question. And if that were true, you would be right to ask, why even bother being Catholic? Fortunately, however, that is not what Vatican II teaches or the Catholic Church teaches. It's very, very clear that there is no salvation outside of Christ Jesus. That's not only in the document Lumen Gentium, it's also in Nostra Aetate and other documents from the Second Vatican Council. And of course, Vatican II had no intention of overturning any infallible teachings, and it is an infallible teaching that there is no salvation outside of Christ Jesus. He's the way, the truth, and the life, and so on and so forth. So I do want to emphasize that. So when we speak of ecumenism, there's a false sense of ecumenism, or there's a false way in which we can speak of it, and there's a true way in which we can speak of it. Unfortunately, when people use the term ecumenism, oftentimes they're not using it in the proper way that the Second Vatican Council uses it, or the Church itself uses it. They tend to mean a relativism or a universalism that I'm okay, you're okay, we're all going to heaven, doesn't matter what you believe. That's what a lot of people think ecumenism means. And that's, again, not at all what Vatican II taught. In fact, if you read Lumen Gentium, starting with paragraph 14, it's explicitly clear. There's no salvation not only outside of Christ, there's also no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. And a person cannot be saved if they refuse to enter or remain in the Catholic Church if they know that this is established by Christ. Where people get a little bit hung up and confused is the subsequent paragraphs 15 and 16, where it begins to speak about Orthodox, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, and then others, maybe Buddhists and Hindus and atheists. And due to misinterpreting some things in there, they think that it's effectively saying, hey, everybody's going to heaven. And I vehemently will defend the opposite thesis from Lumen Gentium itself in the Second Vatican Council.
Heather, what do you think?
Thank you really for that feedback. I'm going to look up Lumen Gentium in paragraph 14 and educate myself on that. If I may, the tangential kind of question comment is, I've heard that there were 6 Protestant ministers, whatever they are, that were involved in the formation of Vatican II, and why? why did we have
why were Protestants
schismatics involved in?
Yeah.
I know of some observers, but I don't know of any of them having any kind of meaningful impact on the document. And, having an observer at the council isn't necessarily significant. We've had observers in previous councils before. The question is, do they have voting privileges or influence over the documents? And in this case, no, they don't. By the way, I do have several videos. In fact, I have a Vatican II playlist that you're welcome to watch on my channel, Reason and Theology. Plenty of stuff there. I explicitly go over the issue with Lumen Gentium 14 through 16, if you want to take a look at it there.
Am I correct in saying that the church has invited even excommunicated Christians to councils in the past?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not.
We've invited the Orthodox. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an innovation. It's. I think it's a mark of Christian charity and a desire for reunion. But Heather, what do you make of that?
I think that there's more homework that I have to do, and so I will check out that playlist. Thank you.
Very, very good. And I think, Michael, you mentioned at the break that there was some good stuff, because Heather just occasioned this conversation to kind of educate people on Second Vatican Council at Word on Fire.
Yeah, a really good overall view that I've seen was by Dr. Richard Decloux. He puts out a series of lectures on the Second Vatican Council and the documents of them. In fact, he makes them available. It's produced through Word on Fire, but I believe it's available for free, the entire series on YouTube. I know I've seen it before, so I imagine it still is.
I'm going to just zip to the break real quick and get it over with and come back, because we got tons of callers, and I'm looking at these questions of fantastic conversations to come on the Second Vatican Council with our guest, Michael Lofton, right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hosting Women Made New has helped me deepen my own faith, and I look forward to every weekend having those in-depth discussions with my guests. It's been such a blessing being a part of the EWTN family and carry on the mission that Mother Angelica started.
Women Made New, Saturday noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. There's just so many good questions and points of conversation. I want to try to get to all of them if I can. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk about the Second Vatican Council, kind of talking about challenges to the Second Vatican Council with Michael Lofton today. And I'm going to zip right back to Austin, Texas, where Andrew is listening on our website, Catholic.com. Andrew, we're grateful for the call. Go ahead with your question or comment on the Second Vatican Council for Michael Lofton.
Yeah, actually, this just follows on what you were just talking about. Lumen Gentium 16 explicitly says that the Muslims who professing to hold the faith of Abraham along with us adore the one and merciful God, end quote. How is that not heresy? Because they explicitly deny the Trinity. So I understand that, it's... Anyways, I'd just like to hear you go into some detail on that, because there's a lot in there that just seems pretty much explicitly... Well, I'll let you go with it.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles to come at this from. Let me first note that as far back as John of Damascus in the 700s, he identifies Islam as a Christian heresy.
Right.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that anymore. I think it's developed a little bit further beyond being just a Christian heresy at this point, that I would classify it as a different religion. But that kind of shows you how some early people saw it. Now, as late as Pope Pius X, who's there in the early 1900s, but obviously before Vatican II, puts in the Catechism of Pius X, exactly that, what you just noted there from the Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium 16, that they worship the one God. Now, how do we understand that, and why is that not heresy? It is possible for a person to be oriented in their worship towards the one God and fail to do so for salvation and salvifically. Let me explain that. When we say outside of the church there is no salvation, that doesn't necessarily mean that nobody has a proper orientation towards the one God. In other words, if you look at the Jews and the Muslims, they're worshiping the one God of Abraham. However, we would not say that if they're doing so outside of God's grace, that they're worshiping that one God for their salvation, that it's somehow that worship saves them. So salvifically. So we could say that they're oriented in the right direction, but are they hitting the mark? Think of it like a bow and arrow. You can have your bow and arrow pointed towards the mark, and it's right there in the right direction. And they pull the arrow, or they pull the bow, they shoot the arrow, and it doesn't reach the target. It's in the right direction of the target, but it fails to reach it. That's how we would see Muslim worship. It's oriented towards the one God. Together with us, they adore the one God, but their arrow doesn't hit the target, whereas in our case, it does. Much more can be said about that, however. Does that help a little bit?
Andrew?
I mean, it helps a little. It helps a little bit, but I mean, they explicitly deny the Trinity, so they've been told the truth, and they deny the Trinity. And then, I guess my big question is: so much of this is written ambiguously, and it does nothing but bring confusion. When you go back to older councils and older documents, and it was all very clear, and there was no possible misunderstanding of meaning in those older documents.
I would vehemently oppose that tooth and nail. There's no way you could read the ecumenical councils in their acts and come away with that perspective. One of the reasons why we had the Second Ecumenical Council, Third Ecumenical Council, Fourth Ecumenical Council, and Fifth Ecumenical Council is because previous councils had not sufficiently clarified some things, especially in the case of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. It had to tie up loose ends with some confusion, specifically that Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, had on the matter of the three chapters. So no, there's plenty of ways in which people misunderstood documents in previous ecumenical councils, and it caused all kinds of confusion, and we had to go and clean up the mess from it. This is no different. However, what I would say at the end of the day, what it's saying here about Muslims, is that somehow denying sacred scripture? No, it's not denying anything that you see testified to the truth about the Trinity or the necessity of belief in the Trinity. You mentioned that a lot of Muslims deny the Trinity. A lot of Muslims don't even know what the Trinity is, properly speaking. They actually think that the Trinity might be the worship of three separate gods, or they might think that it's the Father, the Son, and Mary, or something like that. So what they're rejecting in some cases is actually not the worship of the Trinity, but a caricature. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that somehow their worship is salvific or they're in God's grace. It just means that they're oftentimes discarding and pushing back against a caricature.
Sure, but then this begs the point of then why are we even writing this? You get what I'm saying? Like, why not say it that way? Why not explain, exactly, because they do explicitly, I can't quote it, but their books explicitly deny a Trinity. I'm not even going to repeat what it says about it.
Oh, I know.
But
I know. I'm aware.
It compares it to,
to polytheism,
excrement, which is explicitly, blasphemous.
But it also identifies the Trinity as Mary, one of the persons of the Trinity. So it's obviously rejecting something that we don't even claim, which is a problem for Muslims in and of itself. But you asked the question, why even do this? Well, first of all, they were very clear in the previous two paragraphs, paragraph 14, that there's no salvation outside of Christ and his church. So they were incredibly, abundantly clear, but unfortunately that gets often overlooked. But you ask, well, why did they put this in? They tell you, the very beginning of paragraph 16, it mentions they are related to us in various ways. Why are they speaking about Muslims being related to us? They're trying to foster good relations. They're trying to say, well, what are some of the positive things we can say about them? We know there's a lot of negative things we can say about their religion. What are maybe some of the positive things that we can say to establish common ground? And once we do that and we establish a rapport, then we can now start to talk about our differences. It's a strategic approach. We might say it hasn't been implemented very well.
Andrew, I'm going to leave it there because, as I said, there's lots and lots of folks with questions about or comments about the Second Vatican Council. I'm going to go now to George in Columbia, Missouri. George, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question or comment for Michael Lofton.
A wonderful topic and a very informed conversation. I was baptized 4 days after the Vatican II Council was implemented on December 8, 1965. And I'm still waiting in my whole life for what the bishops voted on to be implemented in the Western Church. And I just haven't seen it. I've been waiting. And there are just things that were clearly stated in the council documents that Latin would have the pride of place as a liturgical language, that Gregorian chant would have the pride of place. But all I see is anything but that. And if you look at the vital statistics, the number of baptisms, the number of Catholic marriages over time, one has to wonder, where are the fruits of this council? And one just can come to the conclusion that I have is that it just hasn't been given to us the way it was intended.
Let's get a response from Michael.
Yeah, I mean, Pope Benedict agrees with you on that. I've mentioned it before. I'll mention it again. The 2005 Christmas address. He does state that there. That we're still waiting on the fruits. In fact, there was also a document 20 years after the Second Vatican Council that also at that time was noting how they still haven't seen the fruits of Vatican II. That is the positive one. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that that's true. I don't know if I would necessarily say that the decline in numbers is necessarily due to Vatican II. It could be related, but I also think that there were other broader issues going on in society that contributed to the decrease in numbers. So I wouldn't necessarily pin it on Vatican II. But I also don't think that Vatican II was necessarily free from all fault as far as its implementation.
Yeah. Okay, George?
Very good. May I make one observation?
Please.
Yes. I appreciated the comment earlier that, what was precious or holy for 1,000 years doesn't suddenly change its nature. And I have gone to the extent of trying to understand Vatican II by going to the Extraordinary Forum and understanding what was in place before, so that I could understand why the changes were made. But I appreciate that that I'm in line with Benedict. God rest his soul.
Amen to that, brother. That's a pretty good line to be in. I'm going to just keep going if it's okay with you, Michael, because I want to try to get everybody on with you.
Sure.
All right, Albany, New York next. Mike, listening on WOPG in Albany. Go ahead, please, with your question or comment for Michael Lofton.
My biggest concern is the Vatican II popes constantly having these Assisi-type gatherings. Now, the first commandment of God is, "Thou shalt have no false gods before me." But yet, John Paul II at Assisi, and Benedict at Assisi, and this Francis with Pachamama, and this was never ever done before Vatican II. Please show me a pope through the history of the Church that did such things. This is a clear manifest. This is manifest heresy. You cannot worship with false religions or offer our Catholic spaces for Buddhists to come in and put a Buddha on our Catholic altars. This is heresy. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no way around it. And the other thing I don't get is how come? Just one more quick point. How are we making all these Vatican II popes saints? We don't have. We have about 2 pope saints from like Pius V forward, and now all of a sudden we got Paul VI, who that's just an absolute mystery how somebody would make him a saint. John the 23rd, John Paul II. Now they're making John Paul the First a saint. It just doesn't make sense. This crush of saints to like justify this heresy.
It's raining saints around here. What's going on, Michael?
Yeah, I think you offer some points that are fair. However, I'd like to fine-tune some of it. I do want to note, I think we're misusing the term heresy specifically, but I get the sentiment of what you're saying, and I agree that there's some valid criticisms here. But again, let me maybe make them a little bit more fine-tuned. You say, when has this ever been done? In fact, there's been done something worse. We have had a pope who was guilty of idolatry in one particular instance. So that has happened before. Now, in the case of Assisi with John Paul II, which I think was a disaster, he himself was not worshiping any false gods or pagan gods or anything like that. However, I do think that there are some legitimate criticisms of that event. You mentioned there a Buddha being placed on the altar. That, of course, was not done with his consent. He never allowed for it. He was sad to even find out that happened. So obviously there were some abuses for the intention that was actually supposed to be there. Obviously some people abused it. I think it was a disaster altogether. It should have just been prudentially avoided because of those very abuses. You also mentioned Pachamama. I'll note, even though, again, I think this is one of those things that incredibly imprudent move, that Pope Francis himself wasn't, worshiping some pagan idol or anything. In the actual Vatican ceremony, they explicitly identify what they're venerating there as Our Lady of the Amazon, that is the Virgin Mary. We might both agree that that's a very poor depiction of the Virgin Mary. We might both agree that it is scandalous in appearance and imprudent, but I don't know if we could accuse him of idolatry given that. You also then mentioned a whole litany of saints that we have here in the post-conciliar era for the popes. I do have some reservations about sainting literally every single post-conciliar pope. It seems a little conspicuous, but at the same time, it is within the authority of the church to do so. Papal canonizations are also infallible, by the way, so if you want to speak about heresy, you cannot be denying any of these because they are infallible instances. But yeah, whether or not they're the most prudent, I don't know. I do have some questions there.
All right, I want to go back to you. I want to get your response. What do you think? Mike? No? All right. All right, nothing, I guess. Did I go to the wrong line? Oh, I went to the wrong line. Oh, no. Oh, he's not there anymore. Oh, that's why I went to the wrong line. He's not there. I just want to emphasize one thing that you said. You can't blame the Second Vatican Council for all of this. And part of the evidence of that is that virtually every religion in the West has suffered a breakdown in attendance. So sometimes people say, well, we've lost all this mass attendance. Well, look what's happened to Methodists. Look what's happened to, you could fill in the blank. And so the church, the world went wild after the 1960s, and a lot of people stopped going to church. Anything you want to give us before we go, Michael? You just got a few seconds.
That's it. No.
Okay. All right.
I hear the music.
Yeah. Would you say again the piece that you recommended at Word on Fire, though, just so
Sure.
if people want to
Yeah.
follow up with more education on the Second Vatican Council, they can go to
Dr. Richard DeClue on YouTube. Type in Dr. Richard DeClue Vatican II. It will come right up.
All right. And people can go to reasonandtheology.com to find out more about you and your work. Is that right, Michael?
That's it.
All right. I appreciate you. I really do. I feel like this was a big success. I like these ones where people get to air some of the laundry. Do you enjoy that, or is that stressful?
That's my bread and butter.
Okay, because I want to do this again. I want to talk about
Let's do it.
The Second Vatican Council again. We'll let more people come on. But that does it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.